Hello and welcome to the Reorg, where we dive into the Satoshi Nakamoto Institute archives and re-examine old ideas after years of accumulated proof of work. This is your host, Michael Goldstein, also known as Bitstein, and joining me, as always, is my co-host, Pierre Rochard. Pierre, another day in Bitcoin land. How is it treating you?
Yeah, very well. Another day, another podcast.
Yeah, and I think we'll get into it today. I think that'll be a good bit of discussion later. But I've come around to agree with you. We need more Bitcoin podcasts. It's good to have so many that people cannot keep up with all of them.
Unironically, yes.
Yes, not a joke in the least. More people should be talking about Bitcoin. So, we're continuing our journey back through the S&I mempool crash course, and we talked about the monetary policy of Bitcoin, the sort of original value and sort of fundamental values of Bitcoin, and why Bitcoin is not merely a bubble, why there's something more fundamental to it. And the latest section that we've been working through is about, dealing with this expectation of growth and the concept of, hoarding Bitcoin and why that's actually a good thing and a beneficial thing. So we talked about why hoarding is actually where the main value of Bitcoin comes from. And this next one, for this part here is like hoarders can also increase the value of their holdings by investing in open source development that makes the network more valuable as a whole. So on that topic, we're going to be talking about what I think is an underrated gem on the Nakamoto Institute, a 2014 article called The Correct Strategy for Bitcoin Entrepreneurship. And this was written in May 2014, so May 16th, 2014. The price was about $445. And this one's interesting because it's taking seriously the fact that Bitcoin is growing at a basically an exponential rate. People have reason to hoard their Bitcoins, and what that means for how to think of yourself as an entrepreneur in the Bitcoin space. So yeah, with all that, let's jump in. We're all in this together. Bitcoin entrepreneurs have yet to appreciate fully collaborative nature of the Bitcoin economy and its implications for entrepreneurial strategy. Every successful entrepreneurial act improves the Bitcoin economy and attracts more people in, thus raising the value of the coins. Each new service benefits everyone else who is already invested. Consequently, Bitcoin businesses do not necessarily need to see themselves as competitors to one another. Even if they have the same business model, they both have more to gain from the influx of new users from outside than by taking customers from one another. Furthermore, the growth of any Bitcoin business is limited ultimately by the growth of Bitcoin itself. Since the number of coins is strictly capped, the currency must grow with its price. This means that few businesses, if any, can be expected to earn a much better return than the coin itself over time. Entrepreneurs should therefore invest in coins, not businesses, because coins are where the profit is. In addition, if Bitcoin fails, then the Bitcoin businesses fail. So Bitcoin is less risky than any Bitcoin business too. Thus, Bitcoin entrepreneurs should be less interested in making money than in making Bitcoins into money. An entrepreneur who follows that precept should generally be expected to be more successful than otherwise because the potential for Bitcoin itself is so much greater than any Bitcoin business he could invest in. Of course, Bitcoin cannot succeed without businesses, or at least some sort of entrepreneurship. What is the best way to fund ventures in an environment in which they are relatively poor investments? The trick I propose is to think of these ventures more as donations to the Bitcoin economy than as profit-seeking ventures. Any useful Bitcoin service will tend to make the Bitcoin price increase because it adds value to the network. It may therefore be perfectly rational for a Bitcoin investor to contribute the service to the economy for free. Furthermore, the success of such a business being desired by everyone who holds coins, such a business can be run more like a nonprofit or open source project than a business. Thus, a new venture may attract investment even if it is not profitable, as long as it provides a service the Bitcoin world needs. In mid-2013, Armory, an open-source Bitcoin wallet project, received $600,000 in seed funding even though nobody knows how it will eventually be monetized. These people have the right idea, but they shouldn't try to monetize it at all. It is obviously making all the coins more valuable. Don't be a venture capitalist, be a speculative philanthropist. And I do like that phrase. I think there's some things that I would actually push back on, but I want to get to the more important thing first. Is just the fact that because Bitcoin is growing so much, like I said earlier, you can't. I mean, it's very difficult for a business to compete with Bitcoin gains sustainably over time. And so this article is specifically talking about, when they say Bitcoin business, he seems to be meaning open source development, or rather services directly using Bitcoin in some novel way. Whether that's in this case, he mentions Armory, which was an early wallet, and we could actually debate, did that $600,000, was that a good investment or not? But he's talking about these services that are directly using Bitcoin. Whereas I actually think it's important to take this idea when we try to apply it and think more broadly about just business and entrepreneurship in general, because as I see it, any business is a Bitcoin business. Any job is a Bitcoin job if the purpose of the job or business is to acquire more sats. So effectively earn a profit in sats, or do your accounting in sats. And that might also, that might mean literally increasing the number of sats. It could also be, in this case, what's really focused on is thinking about the purchasing power of sats. Is there anything about this that stands out to you?
Yeah, I wasn't sure if you were going to finish the article or if I should start.
Oh, yeah, you can go ahead and hop in for so far.
Yeah, so I think that this is a really kind of... like what you're describing, like the Bitcoin native companies that are building on Bitcoin, and then there's a normal business that's just accepting Bitcoin for payments. And I think there's a third now, which obviously is the Bitcoin treasury companies that are actually admitting that there is no better investment than to buy Bitcoin onto their balance sheet. And so it's kind of, I think, synthesizing this article into one, which is to say that within entrepreneurship, within operating a company can hold Bitcoin on its balance sheet. And I think that that's something that isn't really explored here in this part of the article. I also think that he's right, that it is when they look at like Bitcoin native venture capital, there are some companies that have done well or might have good prospects. The challenge is that hurdle rate that Bitcoin's value is increasing so quickly. I was just looking at Armory. I don't know that Armory is still being maintained, and it certainly has not added. I hope the creator of Armory is not listening, but I don't think it's added a lot of value. I haven't heard of a lot of people using Armory. I've heard lots of people using Unchained, which is kind of an iteration on the custody product. What I think though is true though is that a lot of the entrepreneurs in Bitcoin, they really can't see themselves doing anything else. So it's almost like a moot point. They want to build in Bitcoin, and they don't really care if it's going to underperform holding Bitcoin. So there's speculative philanthropy from a sweat equity perspective as well.
Yeah, as far as like $600,000 in seed funding for it, in some ways it's hard for me to properly judge that, because when you're getting into a world of speculative philanthropy, that means that there. Basically, if you're treating this as a donation, it's hard for me to judge the quality of someone else's donation, because it depends on what did they want out of it versus what would I want out of it.
Well, yeah, but if what they wanted out of it is just they needed a custody solution and they saw Armory as a good option, and so they basically want to bolster the security of their own coins, then I agree that it's subjective and there's no way for you to make a judgment on that. But if their goal was to increase the value of the Bitcoin economy, I think that hindsight 2020 did not increase the value of the Bitcoin economy. Whereas
it's certainly not sort of in a sustainable way, where if you imagine a different world in which Armory is still around and maintained, but also continually pushing sort of the edge of what is possible, like we see with some of the companies that work on, like you mentioned, Unchained is one of them. You also have stuff
Michael,
Nunchuck and others.
That Armory has users, right? Like,
yeah, well, it did back in the day.
Sure, yeah.
I know of people who were using Armory, and in fact, probably using Armory for a large amount of money. I think Armory was...
For myself, I never was interested in it, but yeah.
Yeah, it did have some interesting things about it that were just very early. So kind of separating out a watch-only wallet, the way that they did it was kind of new at the time, or at least like it felt that way, of really separating these things out. So there were things about it that were very, very interesting and innovative at the time. By now they seem old hat, and it did not sort of maintain itself as a organization that was continually doing this, like I said, like we see with some of these other companies. So that's why I that's why I said when we can sort of debate the value of it, because there is a question of like, okay, now that you want to be a speculative philanthropist, how do you look at things and make those judgments? And while any kind of donation thing is going to have a subjective element to it, we can still have some shared principles of how do we want to value things and put a valuation on things so that we can kind of get the most bang for our bucks. We don't want to just throw our sats away. We want to actually use it to increase the value of the network in some meaningful way.
Yeah, and I think that the standard bearer for speculative philanthropy in Bitcoin today is Jack Dorsey and what he's doing with his efforts on the open source front. And then, of course, there's organizations like Brink that are also kind of approaching that for the open source side. It's almost like since this article was written, there's been specializations to where there are Bitcoin VCs, right? And there's speculative philanthropists. So I don't think that there's like an either or, but I don't think that we have enough track record to know which one has a bigger impact overall, or if there's even, if it's like something that's even measurable, or that our own biases would just make us, have confirmation bias over which one did better.
Right. Yeah. I think that it's a very difficult thing to measure, because in some ways we also have this competing notion. Bitcoin is just off on its own with its own fundamentals and just doing its thing, and we're along for the ride. And so it's like, inside us are two wolves, the one that's just along for the ride, and the one who wants to do something in particular that we think will increase the value of the network. And Bitcoin is such a big global thing. It can be hard to know what did your particular thing actually do. But I think this, plays in well as we continue the article. So we'll continue. Yeah.
I do think that, what Saylor's doing is very transparent about what it's accomplished, right? Which is, how much Bitcoin does he hold in strategy? And so I almost think that this article is missing that what if your business is just transforming Bitcoin's risk return profile for capital markets. And so you're combining entrepreneurship with holding. And so it really is arguably the only business that could conceivably outperform Bitcoin would be that business model.
Yes, and I think that you hit the nail on the head with just recognizing that since this was written, there's been much more of a division of labor, and there were certain things that had not been appreciated yet. So I think that this article was still, before we even had, memes of hodling and so on and so forth. And even here, we tended to think of, a quote, Bitcoin business. There was a sort of humor, but I don't remember when it started. It was just realizing is like, no one says that they run a dollar business.
Right.
You just run a business. So this was coming from a specific time, but as we're trying to get across, there is still so much that you can get from this to think through, even this more specialized world of Bitcoin. Let's go ahead and continue on and hopefully flesh this out more. Labor is scarcer than ideas. The task ahead of us is monumental. The construction of a new financial economy to replace the one built around the national currencies. This will take a lot of work. Unfortunately, a lot of work is being wasted right now. The venture capitalists are looking to invest in a sharp team with a cool idea, but the group of people that matters most is the entire network of Bitcoin users, and the idea that matters most is Bitcoin itself. Big new ideas get hyped up almost every week around here, and the Bitcoin economy will work a lot better if people would try harder to ignore them. There are lots of business ideas floating around and limited time to create them. Only ideas that have a very high probability of being an important part of the future Bitcoin economy should be implemented because that is all we have time for, and those are the only ideas worth risking Bitcoins on. The proof that ideas aren't scarce is that anybody can make his own coin at any time. Already there are hundreds, and every one of them is a bad idea from people who don't understand the cumulative benefits of cooperation. Since entrepreneurs don't understand Bitcoin very well yet, it is easy to dazzle them with technobabble and funnel investment into flawed projects like ProtoShares, Mastercoin, and Ethereum that have a very low probability of furthering Bitcoin adoption to any significant degree. There is no real reason to keep secrets because the more that everyone knows about what everyone else is doing, the more easily they can decide what the Bitcoin economy most needs of them. Everything about a business can be done openly for the benefit of the entire industry. Product development, future plans, market research, finances, everything except private customer data, which shouldn't be collected anyway, and in the case of illegal tour businesses, the real identities and locations of the owners. We need open business and open businesses. I think that this is actually that last part. I think that's been a natural part of the Bitcoin economy, where a lot of companies, most of what they do actually is sort of just built on open source stuff. There's not necessarily like a secret sauce per se to something like Unchained. It's just using multisig, as are a lot of these other collaborative custody companies, and other companies such as the hardware wallets. The better ones tend to be pretty open about what chips are they using, what is the specific security model around the parts that they're using. A lot of the software is open source. At least view the code and run it and verify the code. And so this has been, I think, very, very natural. The other thing, though, the idea that, people do waste their time on a lot of bad ideas. And a lot of it's kind of the sort of, not the Bitcoin VC world, just the VC world in general. their foray into cryptocurrency, they never quite understood Bitcoin as a money, but as another app. So that's part of what drives this, I think, is there was always just a desire to make a different app. And so there wasn't an understanding that, making another coin is akin to creating more barter. Because, unless your goal is to actually displace Bitcoin and become, the one true currency or whatever, you're really just creating a sense of barter. And then if you are trying to create the one true Bitcoin, do you actually have what it takes? And we'll be discussing those altcoin dynamics in particular later. The point being is, Silicon Valley tended to kind of fall into those traps of, wanting to build another app or viewing not seeing the issues with a multi-coin economy. And they are looking for, the quick returns. So they actually want to see the returns. So there's a lot of pumping and dumping that comes out of Silicon Valley, and it's made people a lot of money. It's lost people a lot of money, and very little of it has actually come back into Bitcoin in terms of a quality addition to the network. It's really just been a real big mess, to put it in the nicest terms I can put it in.
Yeah, I feel like the Silicon Valley had to create this whole ideology around it of utility, right? We're going to find the utility, which was just a Potemkin village affront around just pump and dump tokens. And the answer of, hey, look, Bitcoin is the thing. And the way that Bitcoin businesses make money is by catering to people who want to hold Bitcoin. And so, you've got to build hardware wallets, you've got to build custody solutions, you've got to build trading venues. And so the trading was fine, right? Until they realized that, oh, actually, we need more trading. It's almost like during the Bitcoin bear market, it's like, okay, our VC business model requires us to constantly be growing. And so right now, the Bitcoin economy is in a recession. So we have to fabricate trading opportunities. So let's gin up altcoins. But I think that the challenge on the custody part is that it's a really tough business, right? That there is a free alternative. There's always, ways to just roll your own and DIY. And so you're always competing against that. And that has been a limiting factor for the growth of VC-backed solutions that are really focused on just holding Bitcoin.
Right. It's that exchange doesn't make enough money, but what if we make it a casino?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, his points about, looking at, well, what is the actual future of Bitcoin? So I just step back and think, what does a hyper Bitcoinized world look like? And what are all the needs that people have then? That's the thing to work towards, because if we start doing it now, by the time we get there, there's good stuff. So even for things where maybe there's not as much payments actually happening at the moment, that will be needed in the future. So you don't wait until 2045 or some distant time in the future when Bitcoin is worth millions or something. You don't wait until then to develop the Lightning Network. You start in 2015. You start, as a research project to figure out, what can be done on Bitcoin to improve payments, and not just Lightning, which has created its own sort of business, but also just general payment stuff like we see with Zaprite. That is that sort of invoicing infrastructure. It's like, yeah, businesses that exist in a Bitcoin world are going to need a way to invoice one another. So you can get started now, and if you have the means to be able to get that work done, it's good work to be done. And even if it doesn't, make a return in the way that you're hoping, because it's so hard to beat Bitcoin, you're getting the ball rolling, and that's very helpful. There was something else I was going to say here.
Well, it also helps push back against the altcoin narratives of like Bitcoin doesn't have cheap payments. It's like, all right, how do we, address that so that more people aren't scammed into XRP or whatever? Well, let's build on Lightning.
Right. Yes, and these the altcoin stuff. I mean, I think. The fact that Bitcoin has the great custody stuff that it does really goes to show how Bitcoiners have been focused on this mentality, because in many ways you look at, say, Ethereum, which is it still number 2? Sometimes Ripple.
Yeah, I think it's still number 2.
Yeah, so it's there, which number 2 doesn't really mean much in the world of power laws, but we'll give it to them. It's number 2, but given the number 2, it's actually rather sad, the state of Ethereum custody, considering it's ultrasound money. So it's obviously going to be, worth way more than Bitcoin ever will in the future. There, as far as I know, mind you, I don't spend a lot of time in the Ethereum world. I try to spend as little time as possible, but what I see is just generally not a lot of custody solutions that are very good. I think, Ledger is a big one. I think Ledger has been an especially big one because of, the openness to having, all of the different coins. So it's a good place for a crypto person to keep all of their gambling tokens in one place. So that's nice, I guess. But, so they have Ledger, so they do have a hardware wallet, but, even then, how much competition do they have within that space that call into question the trade-offs of Ledger? So something I like in the Bitcoin space is that not only do we have multiple hardware wallet vendors, they are all really sort of catty with one another in this beautiful competitive way where they're like, no, everything you do is terrible. This is how we do it because it's even better. And that can be difficult for a person who's just stepping in. It's like, okay, well, which one do I get? But from a perspective of a community trying to learn and develop, that's very healthy. It's very healthy to have people putting each other to the test and really seeing, do you actually do as good of a job as we say? Yeah, as you say. And we see all kinds of incredible work out of the different research groups trying to break each other's hardware, all kinds of like weird laser stuff and like very, very obscure arcane ways of trying to break into a hardware wallet just to see if it holds up. Then you go into Ethereum. So you have Ledger. So there's the hardware wallet. And then you have tons of people storing money in basically browser extensions, like MetaMask and such. And we've seen over the ages now, obviously a lot of people have lost a lot of Bitcoin from poor storage and such. But it feels much more a part of the Ethereum world because they're not as focused on long-term savings, and so they haven't developed what seems like as much like cold security, and then their own behaviors in the marketplace are geared towards short-term behaviors that ends up putting a lot of money at risk in hot wallets. So it's not a good environment for trying to develop things that are really thinking deep into the future. Especially, this is kind of I wonder if you could call it like a sort of another innovator's dilemma where in some sense, when you're trying to come up with new ideas, you probably should actually have some level of conservatism in order to, figure out when you're dealing with a social media company, maybe it's, okay to move fast and break things. But when you're dealing with trillions of dollars, it's a little more dangerous to be as reckless with people's money as they seem comfortable with.
Yeah, that's right.
So continuing on, entrepreneurship as a collaborative scientific enterprise. In an open business world, less experimentation is necessary to produce a workable system than among other businesses because is no reason to keep secrets from one another. All trial and error should immediately benefit all the other Bitcoin entrepreneurs so that everyone can more easily figure out the most effective way to work. Open business, as a generally accepted best practice, would have eliminated terrible businesses like Mt. Gox and Butterfly Labs early on. But even that would have been too late. Everything possible should be done to try to eliminate ideas before they can turn into failed businesses. That means sharing all ideas with the community and investing in nothing that does not already have widespread community support. Much of the Bitcoin world already works very openly. Lots of terrible ideas get shot down all the time in the bitcointalk.com forums. All the software is open source. However, more is required. Bitcoin entrepreneurship should be run more like scientific research than a gold rush or an internet bubble. There should be open research into the future Bitcoin economy, complete with peer review and consensus over which ideas are the most useful and important. Investment should focus on ideas that already have been vetted by the community. It should be considered reprehensible for startups to invent their own cryptographic algorithms. It is too much of a waste of resources to test ideas and experiments with real businesses. All business models ought to be carefully critiqued beforehand, and only the most necessary ones that we have time for should be created. This is not central planning. It is consensus-based entrepreneurship. No one shall be forced to follow any idea at all. It is simply in everyone's best interest to cooperate. If I am right, then soon investors will learn to back only heavily vetted ideas, and entrepreneurs will as well. In the early Renaissance, mathematics was practiced in secret, and mathematicians carefully guarded their own discoveries because a mathematician's career depended on being able to show patrons that he could solve problems other mathematicians could not. However, in 1545, Girolamo Cardano sparked a new trend with Ars Magna, the first published work to include the general solutions of the cubic and quartic equations. He even included secret work with citation by Niccolò Fontana Tartaglia, with whom Cardano had promised not to reveal. Gradually, mathematicians transformed into a tradition characterized by publication rather than secrets. Open access publishing is now demanded. Entrepreneurship is in its renaissance still. Nakamoto Institute was referencing Cardano before a particular coin existed to use that name in such a unfortunate manner. But I think this is interesting in that, just like I was saying, conservatism with ideas can have its benefits. That's not to mean that you should be overly conservative or anything, but there are ways that we can use our brains to think through ideas and consider whether or not to actually pursue them before it occurs. And altcoins in general is one example of this, where we can use praxeology to, go through all of the logic of monetary economics and monetary competition and come to the conclusion that unless you really have something that's going to be, 100, 1,000x better than Bitcoin as a monetary good, which, as we've discussed previously, itself is just very hard to imagine, let alone actually put to paper some kind of actual technological improvement. Because of that, we can from the get-go just say, hey, I wouldn't bother doing that. But, many people still choose to because they want to try to outperform Bitcoin, or they just, want to be able to print money for themselves, et cetera, et cetera. But for those who are focused on Bitcoin's long term, that can give you a way to just focus in. And I think that's important. We've seen a lot of ideas over time that rear their ugly head again. So things like having social media on the blockchain or something of that sort. These were ideas that existed as, I remember them being on the scene in 2013 of like, hey, why don't we use Bitcoin transactions to be able to do tweets or something? And people just did that over and over. And like there was new waves of it. And in fact, it fueled a lot of the kind of Bitcoin fork stuff is, projects in the new forks. They wanted to like recreate these 2013 conditions. But for those of us who had already been there, we had already worked through the ideas to such a degree that it was completely reasonable to say, hey, let's not even, like, that just doesn't actually seem like a good idea anymore. It was a cool idealistic concept, but maybe that doesn't matter. And in fact, when you really look into the future of Bitcoin, you can really speculate on all kinds of possible ways that society has changed. But there's also a lot of core things that we know for sure are going to be needed, like custody, like, various, kind of financial institution type things. And I say that in the most broad terms possible. But these things are actually going to be needed. You could do a lot more to actually just focus on that than try to go along with very fanciful ideas that we've already kind of realized just don't work.
Yeah, I think it's really ironic that Daniel wrote hey, you should have broad community consensus before doing your thing.
Yes, an unfortunate irony on that one. But, I think another point of this, though, is that in many ways, closed source Bitcoin itself is suspect. If someone came to you with a new wallet product, but they wouldn't let you view the code that you were running to manage your keys, you should run away as fast as you can. That goes back to the old wallet inspector meme, the Simpsons thing. So, Bitcoin naturally, because of the adversarial conditions, I think lends itself to demanding open source and sort of open collaborative enterprise, because we want to make sure that eyes are on the things we use to make sure it's not screwing us over. So, in many ways, if you use a wallet, you want that to be looked at. You want to make sure, BTC Pay Server, something like that is based on open source tools, because you want to make sure that it actually generates the correct addresses for you. Not even just, it's not even holding keys, but just to make sure that it's using open source BIP32 libraries to get the right address next. That is an incredibly crucial component of allowing people to trade Bitcoin, is making sure it's going to the right place. So closed source Bitcoin stuff is kind of at odds with Bitcoin, and anything to do with working with Bitcoin directly naturally demands having that openness.
Yeah.
And I think this also, all this stuff is I think the importance of toxic maximalism, laser eyes, all of that, because of the focus that it inspires in people. So it says, let's focus. Let's focus in on, keep our eyes on the prize of the very long term, and not get distracted by all sorts of things. Even if it seems like, you could get some sort of short-term profit, it's probably not actually going to beat out Bitcoin in the long run. And instead, I want to focus on making the Bitcoin that you have more valuable, and the Bitcoin network that you're a part of more valuable as a whole. And likewise, allowing, toxic maximalists are sort of the sort of real consumer protection. Anyone who has relied on the SEC for consumer protection, for instance, has gotten absolutely wrecked, because they wait until after FTX or whatever blows up to do anything about it. And even then, they don't always actually, follow through in a good way. They lose lawsuits to Ripple and so on and so forth. So you can't rely on, them as consumer protection. But the toxic maximalists who have seen that these things just are not going to be able to provide better value than Bitcoin itself, they have been able to give that consumer protection, and they do. And you can add here a sort of entrepreneur protection of, entrepreneurship is a very difficult thing. There's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. And if you're going to put that kind of energy into something, you should be able to do it in something that is going to have long-term, lasting value for yourself and the people that you're trying to provide for. So, conclusion. In a low-growth economy, one grows rich by carefully leveraging one's skills and assets so as to negotiate the most profitable trades. In other words, wealth comes from performing better than everyone else. It makes sense to guard closely any edge that one might have. Whereas in a high-growth economy, wealth comes from doing as well as everyone else. It is more difficult to improve one's state relative to everyone else than to enjoy the overall growth that improves everybody's state. And there's a footnote. In a post-singularity world, everything should be expected to grow at a phenomenal rate, similar to the growth of the Bitcoin economy today. Thus, I would expect the attitude of sharing and collaboration to apply generally. The Bitcoin world understands this instinctively, but needs to take it to its logical conclusion. The entire Bitcoin economy needs to be open sourced. This is how to make Bitcoin succeed most quickly and with the least effort, which is the best outcome for everyone. Let's get to work. So I also do think that that's an interesting point with post-singularity. I don't know how much I in particular, believe the ideas of singularity, but we are kind of watching the growth of a separate industry of AI tools. And that's something where, just recently ChatGPT released new image generation, and it took the world by storm because everyone was making their Studio Ghibli versions of pictures. And it was just a very remarkable improvement to image generation. And image generation itself, was nowhere just a few years ago. And I've been able to make a few memes that were also just rather impressive, things that used to be something that I could only it'd be so funny if I could have an image for it. And now I can actually make happen. And that's something too, where we are getting to experience another high growth economy. That one, it's harder. I don't have the same conviction that I have with Bitcoin in terms of, what value it will deliver overall. But it is another place where you can see the same thing happening. And I do think that you can also sort of abstract this. The reason why this applies to Bitcoin is because of the fact that it is a very high growth economy, and it's very hard to really sort of compete in that, in like he says. And so in these high growth environments, it's better to kind of be along for the ride and enjoy these sort of fruits of capitalism, in the sense of everyone is getting a lower value of marginal goods, and so we all benefit, and it's very fun, and we should take it in a way that is actually conducive to happiness and fulfillment in that, which is really going to come from the collaboration.
Yeah, I also think that, with AI, there's this difference between who gets the value. And I think that with AI, it's the users who really get the value. I mean, I feel like I underpay for ChatGPT, whereas with Bitcoin, it's the holders.
Yes. Although, I mean, I guess the holders are the users, and we do get to underpay.
Well, what I mean is that the users, if we think about it in the sense of the kind of Bcasher view of what a user is, of somebody who just uses Bitcoin for payments, they are really not going to capture much of a consumer surplus from doing that compared to using AI. Right. So I think, an interesting aspect of this article as a whole is that, it's talking about speculative philanthropy, but
it's not really saying so in an altruistic sense. It's not expecting people to just like, hey, give up your sats, to make things better, but instead showing that it's actually kind of in your interest to want to, just do these things where even if you find yourself, you might have an idea that's worth putting some sats down on because of the fact that you think that if it succeeds, it will really help the network and be beneficial, which is also good for you, which I think touches on, for instance, the, sort of subjective valuation of the outcomes of these market benefits. So it's like, it's purchasing power as a whole, not merely the real amount of coins that you have, or sorry, the nominal amount of coins that you have. And so, I'm not telling people to go, spend your coins or anything, but there are more ways of looking at a Bitcoin holding that than simply holding on. There's other ways to think as well.
Well, I think that we'd have to distinguish between the speculative philanthropy where you are actually trying to increase the value of your Bitcoins by making an investment where the return will not come from the investment, it'll come from the increase of the value of your Bitcoin. So that I would call like maybe speculative strategy of sorts versus you donating your Bitcoin for ideological reasons, right? Where it's like, and I think this is really what Jack Dorsey's doing, even though he might think he's doing the former. He thinks that it's going to like pump the Bitcoin price. I don't think he thinks that, to be honest. I think he has a vision for the future about empowering individuals to be able to control their own money, and that, that's what motivates him to invest in Lightning technology and open source, is that decentralized vision of the future, not pumping his own banks. Not that there's anything wrong with one or the other. I just think that people confuse the two. And so they think that they're doing something that will increase the value of Bitcoin, when really it's like, no, it's not increasing the value of Bitcoin. It's just aligned with your ideology. And that's fine. Just be honest with yourself.
Yes. So this is a very important point that I think you're bringing up, and it applies all over the place, which is when people start working on a project, there can be this danger of believing that your business or idea is sort of like more important than Bitcoin itself, or that Bitcoin, it is the sort of killer app for Bitcoin. And so the future of Bitcoin rides on your particular thing. And we've seen over the years a lot of people burn themselves out because of doing that. And I think being able to separate it like you did plays one part in helping kind of fight that, which is, well, I think that Bitcoin will continue to exist regardless of if I do this. However, if I do this and if it succeeds, the world that will develop around Bitcoin will be more in line with the world that I in particular want to see. That's a much different thing to say than Bitcoin won't succeed unless. It's like, well, no, maybe like your particular vision of Bitcoin won't succeed unless. But that doesn't mean, Bitcoin itself, the blocks are going to stop coming in and people are going to stop holding and so on and so forth, just because your social media network is not working out.
Yeah, it's like Bitcoin already exists. It already works. And so, you have to accept that as a given, first of all. And there's also the negative version of people will say, hey, look, if you build this, it will destroy Bitcoin, right? So, for example, people talk about the Bitcoin mining pools, and they're like, oh, look, Ant Pool, they built this thing where, they have this outsized, market share in terms of block template construction, and so this is going to destroy Bitcoin. Or Coinbase, they custody 10% of the Bitcoin, so this is going to destroy Bitcoin. there's all sorts of theories about successful entrepreneurs through their success destroying Bitcoin because they're too successful. And I think that is equally misguided as saying, oh, my company is going to fix Bitcoin. It's going to rescue Bitcoin.
Yes. Well, and, we see that over and over. It's like, oh, this is going to bring the fun back to Bitcoin, which will allow it to actually succeed, because it's failing when everyone is not having fun and they're just watching, the growth of the economy instead.
And listening
That's not
to
very
podcasts.
fun. And I think so. A couple, other things we've mentioned them already, but I do want to restate this, which is we already see a lot of Bitcoiners naturally sort of open sourcing things, including in this sort of business sense. So I remember when Block, published their playbook, they were very open about here's specifically what we did, with our treasury strategy for Bitcoin. Saylor has been a completely open book about everything the entire time that he's been a part of it. And he, continues to win in terms of acquiring more Bitcoin. And I think also just making a very large impact on the public perception of Bitcoin, which obviously helps Bitcoin a lot when there's more positive or, at least less negative, those two together, when there's better perception overall, net perception of Bitcoin, that allows people to be more open to Bitcoin and start to see how it benefits them. And he's been very open with how all of it was, and he's also helping a lot of businesses start to see how they can accrue value as well. That kind of goes back into our discussion last time about Bitcoin's compound rewards and zombie companies and such, and all these companies finding that the best way is just to hold Bitcoin. Saylor, by being an open book, has shown the way for how companies can think this way, and I think that will naturally lead them, as you say. It's a good synthesis towards kind of just speculative philanthropy as just a way of doing business. I think a big overarching point is that the real edge is in Bitcoin itself. And so we are, I mean, this is one of those things we say, and it's one of these things. I don't even know how what term you would use, but it's like a half joke where it's joking, but it's totally not a joke, but it's said in a cheeky way, but it's totally serious. It's like we're still very early. We really are still very early. And because of that, there is still such a huge informational asymmetry that just being a part of Bitcoin, after previously not being a big part of not being in Bitcoin, is an extremely profitable move. And so this gets us back into, the podcast thing. So yeah, actually having more Bitcoin podcasts is good. I'd like to hear your thoughts on your why you want more podcasts.
Why do I want more podcasts? I like to hear myself talking, I guess. No, it really has to do with the fact that there's still a lot of podcasts that are crypto podcasts and are spreading bad ideas. And if you have like a poison in the well, one way to get rid of the poison is to dilute it. And so you just add more and more Bitcoin podcasts, and eventually we drown them out. So it really is to that point of education, right? And getting people to understand that I feel like if people are exposed to crypto ideas first, if they start listening to Bankless and they get brainwashed by David Hoffman, that's hard to undo. And that they end up just going down that path. And to Daniel's point, they waste a lot of time and capital. So that's really, I think, that my motivation for more Bitcoin podcasts is that it's a medium where it's permissionless, right? Anybody can start a podcast. You can even start multiple podcasts. And it's also that it's long form. So you can get ideas across that maybe don't fit into 280 characters on Twitter, or are more, you can go deeper And as we've seen, with all the different like Michael Saylor podcasts, it's like he's done the rounds and has been on, I think, every crypto podcast as well, sharing his ideology. And so that's why I think that, we need more Bitcoin podcasts, unironically. And, people complain like, oh, I can't keep up with all the different ones. You don't have to. You literally don't have to listen to all the Bitcoin podcasts. Okay. There's no obligation. But it is a matter of, hey, find the ones that you like and then listen to those and share those with your friends who you think would like it. And then if there's different ones that you think your other friends would like, for example, there's the MicroStrategy podcast. So if you have friends who are in corporate finance, maybe you share that with them. So, there's lots of different audiences for different content. And that's why there's just like a thriving intellectual marketplace for podcasts.
Yeah, and in that case, I mean, you're not really spending a lot of, sats to produce a podcast, to get some editing and maybe some hosting and such. You might shell out a little bit of money, but overall, it's a free medium, and there are platforms, that make it free to make podcasts. So it's like if you don't want to spend sats on improving production quality and such, and you're fine with a certain level, like you can do that, or even just to start before it's really going to take off or anything. It's there, so it's not really a cost in terms of sats per se. It's more of a cost of time. But why do that? Well, as a speculative philanthropist, it's the idea that if you do it, you might be able to get the ideas across to someone who otherwise wouldn't have gotten it. And that can change their lives. And when those people are suddenly stacking sats, that benefits everyone else too. I just recently heard a story. I was talking with someone. They didn't even actually know who I was. But then, when my name came up, he actually wasn't super familiar with me, but he had recalled an old episode of a podcast, a noted episode that we did many years ago. And it was the Noted podcast. And we talked with the authors of the book, Thank God for Bitcoin. And for him, his mom is a very devout Christian woman. And he sent that podcast to her, and apparently it had a huge effect. And it was actually very effective at winning her over to Bitcoin. And I think that's so interesting because honestly, like I didn't remember that. Like I mean, I know that I did that episode, but it wasn't necessarily, it's not like top of mind of like, the greatest Bitstein hits or anything. And yet it was out there as a sort of capital good that's reaping some listens here and there, and it gets into the right person's ear and it can change their lives. And so, I've had experiences like that. It's like you never know who's listening, and you never know what impact you're having. And so if you have ideas like Bitcoin that are so important, and from a, even just like a selfish, greedy perspective, if you want your own money to be more expensive, or, you think that it's like, genuinely good for the whole of humanity, then it's good for people to hear these ideas, because then the ideas can spread more. And so, it doesn't come at a big cost, and yet it can really improve the quality of the Bitcoin economy in ways that you might not even foresee. And so I agree. I think, I only keep up with so many Bitcoin podcasts. I can only listen to a few, but there's so many out there, and it's wonderful because you also get times where there just happens to be an interesting episode somewhere. So, even for a podcast, you don't keep up with all the time. The fact is that it's going along and it has that one episode, and it does change your life. these are wonderful things to have, and we shouldn't take these opportunities lightly. And it's very popular to kind of, make jokes about podcasts and kind of make fun of, it's like every dude wants to create a podcast and such, but they should. I think it's a good thing. We live in a free and open society because we want to be able to share ideas, and we shouldn't take that privilege lightly, especially given the possibilities.
I also think that it gives a human voice to what would otherwise be, a very boring Bitcoin, or one that you just assume that everybody else who's into Bitcoin is a criminal and you're the only honest person involved. And so just, making it more relatable.
That's a good point. And especially when you have many different kinds of Bitcoin podcasts that are tailored to different people, because it's made by different people who have different interests. You see, it's not, it's not even really used by a lot of criminals. And instead, it's like, no, you have blue collar workers, you have finance guys, you have politicians, you have software engineers, you have people in the energy business, all these different walks of life all over the world are into Bitcoin, and it does give that voice. You really do. You do get to see that.
There's even an anti-Bitcoin podcast. I think it's called this Crypto Skeptics, where they complain about tethers all day and whatnot.
So they're anti. Oh, so okay, Tether. Okay, but they're anti-Bitcoin.
Yeah, they're anti-everything. They're anti-Bitcoin.
Like the Buttcoiners. Like, is this the Buttcoin podcast?
I mean, I'm sure that they might be like the admins on that subreddit, but it's they're Tether truthers and they hate everything about Bitcoin. So they are.
So you can go listen to their arguments too.
You know what? I do. I do, because I also listen to like Ethereum podcasts and whatnot, because I find it entertaining to hear what's going on the other side of the fence.
I also think that, it's good to hear where people are tripping up on things, so that, as an educator, I have a better idea of what ideas are not getting across. So sometimes, there's a critique where it's like, it actually does sort of change my perspective on things. And other times I see, this particular meme trips you up because you're focused on it from this angle as opposed to like the substance itself. And so if we communicate it in this way, maybe you'd get it. And then there's others where it's like, like there's not really much helping you. But actually hearing those people is a good chance to get a sense of what education needs to be done, which is also good as a sort of entrepreneur, a speculative philanthropist trying to improve Bitcoin. That's good market research.
Yeah. I was listening to Bankless yesterday, actually. They were going on about the internet financial system and how it's very important that we change the way we talk about crypto, because they've developed such a negative reputation on the terminology, and that they have to start calling it the internet financial system so that people will buy their bags. So, all sorts of entertainment, but it did give me an idea for a tweet. Okay, Bitcoin's the internet monetary system. It's like you can be inspired by anything.
Yes. Yeah. So, and I would like to point out more generally, because podcasts kind of fit into that, it's the educational side. I do think that is part of entrepreneurship. That's what I do here, with the Satoshi Nakamoto Institute. It's my own humble attempt at being an educational entrepreneur, to be able to help spread these ideas. And all of this applies to that as well. What is it that I can do to better teach people about Bitcoin so that they join in the fun, both for, self-interested reasons and for the good of humanity. And there was something else I was going to say. I'm totally blanking on it now. It was something about how you never know who's listening. But anyway.
You do never know who's listening. Yeah. I've had lots of people come up to me at conferences and whatnot and say, hey, really enjoy your podcast. And then I'm like, which one?
Well, I guess I remembered a different one, which was, the putting a human voice to things. It really does make a difference as well, because I've had many experiences where people could just tell how passionate I am about Bitcoin, and that gets them excited. People are excited about things that people are excited about. You see this online. You have guys who it's some dude who has a channel about like trains or something, and he's, there's a nice British lad who goes to train stations to go see all of the trains go by, and he'll tell you what train is going by, and you wouldn't really think much of that, but it's actually wildly popular because it is so infectious to see someone who is so, sincerely interested in trains and exuberant about trains. And you see this with all sorts of stuff online, whether it's, kind of like people who are doing restoration of things or, whatever. There's all kinds of a gazillion different topics. People are gravitated towards those people with sincere exuberance for different topics. And so, in text, some of that emotion can be lost. It can be very difficult to really get that exuberance across unless you are a very skilled writer or poster. But, when you can hear someone's voice, you can really get a sense for it being something that people are excited about. And that creates a situation where it's like, even if I don't fully understand what they're excited about, there's something going on here that I should probably at least kind of look into to get a sense of. And, that's how people find their ways to the entrance to a rabbit hole. And once again, like these things shouldn't be taken lightly. And we should be very excited that we have these opportunities to share our ideas.
Yeah, 100%.
So with all that being said, go out there, let's get to work, look into the Bitcoin future and see what needs to get done, and go ahead and start doing it. Talk to people about it, find out, what good ideas are out there, what good ideas are not being executed, and, start doing it. And even if it's just, stacking more sats or, kind of integrating Bitcoin into your business as a treasury, and then, talking to other local businessmen about what you're doing and why. Yeah, get to work. So, Pierre, thank you for joining.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Thank you for listening to The Reorg. This podcast is brought to you by the Satoshi Nakamoto Institute, dedicated to advancing and preserving Bitcoin knowledge. Our mission is to deepen understanding and appreciation of Bitcoin, not just for today, but for generations to come, by creating enduring educational resources and generational knowledge for generational wealth. If you enjoyed the show, please support our work by sharing links, deepening your own Bitcoin knowledge by exploring and studying the SNI archives, and contributing sats. As a 501c3 nonprofit, we rely entirely on supporters like you. Whether you can give a few Satoshis or a few thousand Bitcoins, your contributions enable us to continue educating current and future Bitcoiners worldwide.